My name is Colin Pryce. We were living in Lilongwe, and I started at Lilongwe European School, as it was known then. In its new site, it had already moved from the golf course to the present site in 1953. And I attended the first 2 years there, and then due to a fallout between a lot of parents and the head teacher, who was very unliked, some of us moved to Fort Jameson School for a couple of years until by that time, that's right, the Federal Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland Education Department sort of revamped the school and changed the head teacher. And then we all went back in 1957, I went back to Lilongwe School and continued there up until Standard 5, the last year, 1960, before leaving and heading for high school in Blantyre, St. Andrews High School. And then after that, I did up to 1963 at St. Andrews High School. And then with the breakup of the Federation and the change in the politics in Malawi, or Nyasaland becoming Malawi, my father gave way and to allow the Africanization of the what he was then working for, the ADMARC, APNMB as it was then, and then became ADMARC. And so we moved to Rhodesia, where I finished my high schooling at Sonoya High School in Rhodesia, and then my formal education at the Gwibi Agricultural College, just north of what is now Harare. I was born in Cape Town, South Africa, in 1948, a long time ago. And at the advent of the change of politics this seemed to be a recurring theme in my life following that, the change of politics in South Africa when the National Party came to power. My father didn't want anything to do with that. And he had a sister living in Limby at the time, married to a man working for the Nyasaland Railways. And my father in fact, she came down on holiday to Cape Town and said that they're looking for the Native Tobacco Board, as it was called then, were looking for tobacco supervisors. My father applied and he got the job. 5-day steam train journey from Cape Town to Limby. We arrived filthy dirty, having traveled all the way through the whole of Southern Africa. And then took the train from Limby to Salima, overnight train, and then a 2 to 3 hour car journey in those days from Salima to Lilongwe. And we ended up living in our first place in the Central Province, as it was called then, was a tobacco station called Chileka, which is on the Mchinji Road, just near Namatete. So that was our first home. No electricity, no water, no phone, no tar road, toilet outside, kitchen outside, everything. And my father didn't even have a car then. He was going and doing his supervision work with the farmers growing tobacco and groundnuts and maize and so on a bicycle. So we then did 3 years there and got our first long leave. And when we came back, we were stationed to Malangalanga, the provincial headquarters of what then became the African Tobacco Board. And during that time, it then became known as the Farmers Marketing Board. So an interesting little thing was that there was social awareness of changing the name from Native Tobacco Board to African Tobacco Board to Farmers Tobacco Board, and we were becoming more and more politically correct in the name. And it was while we were at Malangalanga, I started school at Lilongwe School as a day scholar. in kindergarten, which was called Sub A and Sub B, Kindergarten 1 and Kindergarten 2. And then I went up to Standard 1 and then Standard 2 and all the way up to Standard 5. But after 3 years, we took long leave, and when we came back, we were then stationed outstationed to Mpingu, which again is on the same road as Chileka, but just past Chitedzi Research Station on the Mchinji Road. And believe it or not, we were only 14 miles from Lilongwe, but I became a boarder because of the bad road conditions. And during the rains, there were times when you couldn't even get through. So I was a boarder 14 miles away from school. I'm now living in Belgium with my Belgian wife, in the east, in the Ardennes. Beautiful, very green, very wet at the moment, very cool for summer. The last time we visited Malawi was 1996. Yeah, I was actually in Tanzania at the time. No, yes, it was 1996. I was in Tanzania with the UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, dealing with the unfortunate Rwandan genocide refugees. So we visited and we went to Lilongwe and went to Malangalanga and actually went to Bishop Mackenzie. It was school holiday time, so there was nobody there at the time. So we walked around, and there was one very interesting thing which I still amuses me is the old original block, which I think is still there, isn't it? The original classroom block and administration block. That small concrete quad or square in front of the steps up to what was the original school hall, that I said to my wife, believe it or not, the whole school stood on this little square of concrete. And when we looked at it now as adults, we couldn't believe that it's such a small square, but that gives you an idea. There were very few, I would say there was probably 60, 70 pupils in total at that time, when I was at school, when I first started at Lilongwe. It's amazing how it has developed. I mean, there was a development while I was there of a new school block was built behind the original block there. I think it was 2 classrooms there. And then just after I left to St. Andrews, finally they were able, after years and years of raising funds for a swimming pool, a new swimming pool was built. And that photo I've sent you, I mean, it was just a minute pool, but that pool was basically built with fundraising by the parents of the school. And that was quite a day. But my sister enjoyed that. She also went to Lilongwe for a while, and then saw that part of this development of the school. And of course, I was there. I'm maybe jumping a little bit, but the big thing is Bishop Mackenzie School. I was there and I participated in the ceremony of the renaming ceremony of the school. And I was chosen to read a passage of the Bible, one verse. Several of us of the seniors, and I think even some juniors, were participated physically as reading parts of the ceremony. So that was a big day for the school when it became, it had its own name. Well, for a start, this was 1963, if I remember correctly. Lilongwe European School did not ring well, that name then. It was not really a European school. They could see the winds of change were blowing in Africa at the time. So obviously it had to mature, it had to grow up and become a school with its own name, and to recognize, because Bishop Mackenzie was an important figure in the early days of David Livingstone and so on, and in the ending of the slavery trade and so on. And there was very little recognition of him in Nyasaland at the time. So I think that was all part of it, that this was a memorial to him. Well, the day-to-day school, well, firstly, I thoroughly enjoyed school at the time. It was, you do mention about sort of how, sort of hinted that, yes, it was a fairly free and easy education at the time. It wasn't strict, and there weren't, like it is nowadays, with my children going through schools, there's so much pressure. There wasn't the pressure that I could feel, and I remember there wasn't the pressure. It was nice to come. My record at school was that I regularly came second in class in the school exams. There was one girl, Stevie Ambrose, she always came first and I always came second. There was a battle between the two of us, but it was done in a, you know, it was not a big thing as such. It was good. So life was good. My sister was not so happy. She was okay, enjoyed school, but she didn't like being a boarder. She missed home life. But I, as a boarder, it was 4 years difference between us, so I was there for some time before she joined. And we used to, I think the tree might still be there. There's a tree just inside the gate at the end, at the school, at the end of the long road coming down from the roundabout, the Lucuni Road roundabout at the top. And you come down, and there's a big tree in front of what was the school. I presume there's no hostel there anymore, is it? There's no boarding. Yes. My sister, every weekend, we were allowed out on either Saturday or Sunday, and my sister would be standing under that tree waiting for our car to see the car coming down. That was the highlight of the weekend. And then during the terms time, we would have exit weekends, long weekends. But when I first started at Lilongwe, we used to actually have 4 terms a year. So they're fairly short, and we had shortish holidays. The Christmas holidays was always slightly longer, but then it changed to, I think actually it was when Federation came on, it came to 3 terms a year, and there were longer school holidays. And so at school, we would have sports. The main sports were, for the boys, was cricket, football, and for the girls was netball and hockey. Those are the 4. And then there was the athletics, where we all participated. And we used to play sports against other schools in Lilongwe, the Lilongwe Asian School, and especially the cricket and hockey, and they always used to beat us. They were so good at those 2 sports. I can't remember. Oh yes, and then we used to also have scouts and boy cubs and brownies, and that was, as you see from the photos, that was quite multiracial. We had our own scout or cub groups at school, but then we would have weekends or days where we would participate with other groups in the area from Nkoma. In fact, the girl guide in charge of girl guides, she was a missionary from Nkoma, which was in the Protestant mission, and she used to drive in all the way from Denza area. So we used to have sort of a relationship with others in the area, although at school we were mainly all, as the name says, European, but we had Portuguese, we had Italians, there was Americans, Canadians, there were missionaries. The majority of us, I think, were from families working for the government, police, PWD, veterinary department, agriculture department, scattered all over Nyasaland. And then, of course, there was the business people of Lilongwe who also sent their children there, missionaries from various parts. And as I say, in the one photo I sent you, is one of the things is, as boarders coming from different parts of Nyasaland, because of the poor road conditions, the Central African Airways had the Dakota and Beaver aircraft flying to Salima, to Mzimba, to Mzuzu, to Karonga, to what other places? It was mainly to the north, actually. And they used to fly down from backs and forwards to school. And of course, the highlight of that was that it had to fit in, their travel had to fit in with the timetables. And the timetables didn't always necessarily enable them to fly at the end, last day of school. They often would fly 1 or 2 days before the end of school. And they always thought that was great because they would actually have 2 days short of the term. And that was a big deal, that I'm leaving before you and so on. And that was how small our lives were, the small things that we appreciated. Because in those days, no television, we used to get from the Times bookshop, read the comics of the American comics of Dell and I forget the other one, comics, all the British Dandy and Beano comics, which would be sent out by airmail, and we would then share these around. That was our sort of reading material. As I've sort of touched on already, we enjoyed life. Was good. I forgot to mention one thing, that in the holidays, you asked about the holidays. The holidays nearly always was at least a week down to Salima, to the lake shore. That was the highlight of the holidays, was to go swimming in our own ocean, Malawi's own ocean. And those were wonderful times. We would not necessarily stay in the hotels, but actually stay in some of the company cottages that were dotted along the shore, the seashore, the lake shore. And so that was a highlight. And then others would go up to the Nika Plateau or down to Blantyre, Malangi, and so on. But due to the poor traveling conditions, we basically stayed close to home, as it were, and not going too far. Salima, but Salima was connected to Lilongwe eventually with a narrow 9-foot wide tar road winding through the hills. Excuse me. And that was the longest bit of tar road anywhere in Nyasaland at the time, from Lilongwe to Salima, which we used to have to battle with, passing the massive trucks of carrying the tobacco and maize and that down to the railhead at Salima. Well, as I put in my notes here, that Malawi, or Nyasaland, was very underdeveloped compared to the rest of it, especially southern Rhodesia. Northern Rhodesia was a bit more developed because it had the copper mines and so on. But we were very much akin with the eastern province of northern Rhodesia, now Zambia, of Fort Jameson, Chipata. Very underdeveloped, quite insulated from the rest of the world. Never mind the rest of the country. Never mind the rest of the world. And so it was quite different, and it was always, and we could tell always in these, there was the politics of that southern Rhodesia got everything, and Nyasaland was, we had, of course, we used to see at the airport the Wanela aircraft flying in and out, taking all the young men who were volunteering to work in the mines in South Africa and then the gold mines. And that was quite something to watch when they would be getting onto the planes. They would literally get onto the planes in their shirts, in the clothes they were wearing, which were not the best clothes. They would try to have the best clothes, and they would leave like that. But when they came back, these planes were stuffed full of suitcases, bicycles, hats, sunglasses, you name it, coming back having earned money and seen a completely different life that they never ever saw in Nyasaland. And that was a very interesting thing, was how, and that was quite a big thing, apart from ADMARC, who was providing this aid for growing crops, the tobacco and so on, as a cash crop in Nyasaland. Then there was the the diaspora, which is quite different nowadays. They get into big jets and fly off all over the world and send the money back via Western Union and so on. Whereas then it was thing. So that was quite an event to see as these planes flew in and out. So yes, the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland did help Nyasaland to a certain extent. I mean, the school benefited from extra funding and so on. Although they still weren't able to provide a swimming pool, we still had to raise funds for the swimming pool. But I remember everything's changing. All the blankets in the hostels, the boarding school hostels, were stamped with NG, Nyasaland government, before. Then all of a sudden, when Federation started, we arrived back for the new term, and there we have the triangle with RNG, Rhodesia and Nyasaland government, stamped on, and everything was changed from NG to RNG. So we got new equipment and the vehicles, the police vehicles, the PWD vehicles, everybody got, and then roads started to get better improved, not necessarily tarred, but they were graded properly, and we could travel around a bit better than before. But still, Lilongwe in particular was very much isolated from the rest of the other schools. I see that you have inter-school sports with Lusaka and Zimbabwe and so on. Then we hardly ever had, I don't think ever in my time did we have any relationship with other schools in the Federation. We were still quite isolated in that respect. Yes, I mean, there was one question you have is, memorable events. And one memorable event is, I'll go back before Kamuzu, and that is the Nyasaland emergency, as it was called. And I was at school then in Lilongwe, and I remember distinctly, very well, that time. We were living at Mpingu at the time. My parents had to move to Chitedzi for safety reasons. Although, as my father records in his memoirs, that he actually his staff and the others at Mpingu, actually he used to go back during the daytime and then at night come and join us at Chitedzi when we were living with other at the research station. When he'd go back, they would say, "Please, Bwana, can you come back to us? We feel safer when you are here. And you and your family are here, then you leave us alone at night," sort of thing. So he asked his boss in Lilongwe at Malangalanga, and they sort of reluctantly said, "Okay, you go back, but it's entirely at your own risk." So we went back to Mpingu and lived there, no problems at all. I remember the Rhodesian Air Force planes flying over, dropping propaganda leaflets and so on, and everybody running to catch these papers. The majority of people having no idea what's written on them because the literacy rate was not very good then amongst the Africans. So that was rather an expensive exercise for the federal government. But I remember the school, of course, was across the valley from the big market, Lilongwe market, on the other side of the valley. And we used to see, and we could hear the noise sometimes when there was a bit of a riot going on, and the police would come in, fire tear gas, and we'd see the clouds of the tear gas and so on. So for us school kids, it was an adventure. We didn't really appreciate the politics of it all. So being boarded, we had a contingent of Rhodesian or federal national servicemen, military, guarding the school, and they would patrol at night. We got told off by the chief of the army that were patrolling us that we mustn't shine our torches on them at night when they're patrolling, because if there's anybody coming, they will see us. Because of course this was fun for us. We would we'd get up and not being, we were meant to be asleep, but we'd go to the window and shine torches to see if we can find any of the soldiers patrolling around and around. So we'd get into trouble for doing that. And so that was how we sort of lived through that time of the emergency. There were some restrictions, some travel restrictions, but generally speaking, which is, I think, it's a bit like the Malawians. Yes, there was an emergency in that, but I don't think the full heart. I felt anyway that the full heart was not into it. There were still nice people. You always get a bad egg, but generally the population, like I say, the workers with my father, they asked him to come back, which he did, and there was no problem. They got on well. So that was one memorable occasion. And then I remember one day, in fact, it was at Chitezi. We were coming home for the day. Well, it was a Sunday or a Saturday. And we would car share. My parents would car share. So we'd pick up others coming from Chitezi, and we would drive onto Chitezi, drop those school friends off, and then we'd go on to carry on to Mpingu. But unfortunately for us, we happened to meet Dr. Banda was having a meeting on Chitezi that very same day. And as we were coming up the narrow road, there's this massive crowd of people coming down the road towards us with the motorcycles and the police vehicles in front. And this is before independence, when Dr. Banda was doing his electioneering and so on, and he'd had his rally on Chitezi. And we had to, of course, my mother was driving and she got a little bit flustered, but managed to pull off on the road into the tall grass on the side of the road. And we just sat and watched and that. And as they went past, we actually had a wave from Dr. Banda. So he recognized us and again, it was not threatening at all. It was just an experience. So that was something I remember well. We both do, my sister and I. And then we remember when, by the time, that's right, I was then already at St. Andrews High School. Then we used to, being in Blantyre, we used to often see him traveling up and down past, not far from school, on the Chileka Road to the airport, Chileka Airport from Blantyre. So, yeah, no, I remember those days very well, very much, leading up to independence. Well, when we had our son, I was already working for the UNHCR, and we were working in countries like Senegal, Chad, Sierra Leone, and so on. And our son was going to international schools there. And I could remember how my experiences of Bishop Mackenzie, of Lilongwe, and St. Andrews, and those schools, and it's still going on. And these schools are also run by parent boards, parent trust. So yeah, I have quite a bit, because I actually worked for a while for the Senegal Dakar International School in Senegal, and was part of the parent teachers committee running the school, and then I was operations manager. So I have a pretty good idea of how Bishop Mackenzie is now operating as well. I worked for a while on tobacco farms in Rhodesia, in southern Rhodesia. And then I went up on a holiday back to Malawi by myself, and because I'd finished a job and I had a bit of spare time. So I drove up through Mozambique and then to Blantyre and then up to Lilongwe and drove around. And I then did a courtesy call on the ADMARC headquarters in Limbe, just to say morning to everybody from my father. He asked me to go and say hello, because Mr. Katengeza was the chairman of ADMARC at the time. And my father and he were big friends. They became very friendly during the time when my father was there. So I went into Limbe headquarters. And during the chat, he asked me what I was doing, and I said, "Well, actually, I'm not doing anything." And I told him what I had been doing, and he said, "Well," and this is virtually the words he used. He says, "I will never want to see Reg Pryce's son without a job. We we've got an opening for someone to run the Mzuzu or the Vipia states, and so Mr. Katengeza offered me a job to be the project manager for the Vipia states, which were large estates, 23,000 acres of plantations in various estates around Mzuzu. And these tongue trees are a bit like sort of apple trees, and they produce a fruit which is very high in oil. It's poisonous oil, but it's used in paint and varnish. And it's a Chinese tree originally. So, but a Chinese tree is made in Malawi, not made in China for once. And there were the Commonwealth Development Corporation planted these trees way back in the early 50s. And then the world price for tung oil went down when synthetic oils came in, so they were abandoned. And then the oil price was coming up, and a lot of the trees were still there, these estates. They were overgrown and so on. So the government and with ADMARC decided to rejuvenate and profit on this oil price increase, because the trees are there. So half the cost was overcome. So I went up there to clear the land, recruit and clear the trees and start getting them into production. And together with a Portuguese garage owner in Mzuzu, we renovated the old oil mills, which was the big factory in the center of Mzuzu with its own generators and steam boilers and so on. And this, in fact, the Vipia estates was the nucleus of how Mzuzu came into being, because before Mzuzu was just a little village and a crossroads with the Vipia Road, the Ekwendeni Road, and the Nkata Bay Road, and the tung estates were in that area. And then there was the St. John's Mission, Catholic Mission, and that was it. So the tung estates developed, and the former provincial headquarters moved from Mzimba to Mzuzu, and there became the regional headquarters for Northern Region. And so the Vipia tung estates was a big thing. We were employing over 3,000 people during the picking of the nuts, and then they were sending in with a fleet of 8 tractors and trailers, bringing them into the factory. So that I worked there for 3 years and got that going. And at the same time, I was then asked to develop macadamia estates down on the Nkata Bay, near Nkata Bay, near the tea estates, the Chombe tea estates, which is no longer Chombe, it's now Chombe rubber estate. Because you have the Kawalazi tea estates there, and then the Kawalazi tea estates is now taking up what was the Mzenga estate, which I started, was the Mzenga macadamia estate. And when we went back to Malawi, we went there and were absolutely amazed at how it had all developed. So now it's a massive estates, and there was houses and buildings that I remember being responsible for. What disappointed me was that the current manager who I met there, he had no idea about me and how it had all started. There was no history, so it's important to get the history of things, because it gets lost. And he was quite amazed at how the whole thing started. So I did that for 3 years, helped to renovate, and then I left with the idea of continuing studies in England on agricultural engineering, but unfortunately that fell through. So I continued life with my agriculture diploma, which took me to many things, and I ended up, as your question was, what did I do after school? Well, briefly, I Malawi, and then back to Rhodesia as was then, and general farming on farms, and then the Mazoe citrus estates, and then I joined Tilcor, which is now called ADA, and development projects in the what was then the rural areas, down on the the Lowveld, the Sabi River, with the Chisambanji wheat and cotton estates, and then down in the southwest near Plumtree on the Francistown Botswana border, cotton and wheat irrigation, and I did that up until independence of Zimbabwe. And then I left and went to the UK and did various jobs there, and had a short while had my own business doing soil improvement. That fell through. I had my own business, and I then joined the UN as a logistician during the Bosnian War. And what was interesting we were running convoys from the coast to Sarajevo, which was under siege, and so on, going through where bridges had been bombed and broken between the different factions. So with the UN convoys, we had to go through the mountains, finding little tracks and so on. And some of these tracks on the maps were designated as mule tracks, and they were going with massive convoys of trucks, of up to 20 trucks in a row. And many times we would be in bad conditions, snow or rain and so on. And I'm glad to say my experiences of old Nyasaland, Malawi roads, mud roads in the rainy season, all came flooding back. And I was able to show these long-term English truck drivers how to drive trucks, big trucks in mud and in snow. And so one's experience is always useful, and so I then worked with the UN, say in Bosnia, in Albania with the Kosovo, in Tanzania with the Rwandan crisis, in Chad with the Darfur crisis, in Sierra Leone with the returning refugees. And that's basically what I did until I retired. And then post-retirement, let's say I worked for a while in Dakar, Senegal, at the international school. So I've done a few things, but all along through my life, my experiences of Nyasaland and Malawi, I drew on. And of course, being in an international school, being with others, knowing how to get on and appreciating other cultures. And that is so important in the UN. And unfortunately, the UN is full of people who don't really have that experience. They come in and they try and apply their way of thinking and that without appreciating that other cultures and that look at things quite differently. And that's where an international school education is so important. And that's what my son recalls as well of his experiences being in international schools. He had friends of all colors, and he knew how to, he left knowing how to appreciate, and well, in fact, he did it without thinking, basically. Fortunately, and thanks to Facebook, because when I left to Africa and moved to the UK, I lost touch with everybody, and of course this was pre-Facebook and everything. I had no phone numbers, no addresses, nothing. Completely lost all my friends. But one by one through Facebook, I have gotten back in touch, and yes, we are in touch with pupils of Lilongwe School. They're living all over the place. There's one in Botswana and lots in Australia and New Zealand, UK, USA. So it's we keep in touch, and unfortunately, two of them I've tried to get in touch with photos and that, and both of them have lost their photos. One through a theft or a fire, and the other one through photos. Her parents, for some reason, had all the photos, and all the family photos were lost. So yeah, we do suffer from things, and of course, then you didn't have a mobile phone with a camera on it, so photos are quite rare and very important. I do have more photos somewhere, which I still have. I have to find out where they are, but we try and keep and again, this site that you look at with Abdul, he does a great job with keeping Malawi in the news, as it were. I'd forgotten I had that, and when I was looking through for the photos, this suddenly fell out between some papers, and that again, and this is a big thing I've had a problem, is trying to remember dates of when things happened. And of course, here you see inter-school sports. So the closest other school similar to Lilongwe at the time was actually at Fort Jameson, and so we did have fair number of meetings. They would come to Lilongwe, or we would go to Fort Jameson. All in parents' cars. There was no school bus then at all. And in fact, one of the photos is of that inter-school sports day at Fort Jameson. So I don't know how I got hold of that, of this thing, because that, I'm sure, was not issued individually to everybody who participated. So I was lucky enough to somehow get hold of this card. Right.
Perhaps you were on the team and then you were leading the
yes,
team?
I was in the team, but why I should have that card unless we all got a card, or maybe I was third. Okay, yes, yeah. I'm now thinking, it's now coming to me. That's why I got the card, because I came third in the race. That must be the case. Yes.
Okay.
And that is actually a photo of me coming back from Fort Jameson School. But my caption is that those are the two types of aircraft we used to fly, and others used to fly to and from school up to Mzuzu. The Dakota would go because it was a bigger runway, the large one in the background. But most often we went in the Beaver, which was a 5-seater, and that was a great little plane. And that's me on the right-hand side coming back with two guys who were actually from Livingstonia Mission, and they were going to continue with the plane up to I think they were going to go to Mzuzu, and then they would drive up to Livingstonia from there. So these planes were the lifeline for the Mail, the Royal Mail, backwards and forwards between the different parts of Nyasaland as it was then. And this runway is the airfield, is the old original airfield of Lilongwe. At the top of the hill, you go past the Bishop, the Catholic Mission, up the hill past the Lilongwe Hotel, up, and you come to the Mchinji Road Junction, and the road continues on to Salima and the north. And on the left-hand side there, in that corner, was this airfield. So that's how close the airport was in those days. And this was the annual school sports. And if I remember, red flag was Law's house, and Dr. Laws was one of the early missionaries. And then the yellow flag was Livingston, and the green flag was Howe, and that was the team or the house that I was in, but I cannot remember who Howe, Howe, was, but he must have been an early missionary or something in Nyasaland. And then missing in there is the blue flag of Sharp, who was an early, I think, governor of Nyasaland. Yeah, and this is the school. This is the opening gala of the new swimming pool, Lilongwe School swimming pool. I don't know if it is still there. This is I think behind us is where there was tennis courts from this view of the photo. behind the fence in the back there, and where the Land Rover and the others standing by, that was the playing field. That was the only sports field there was. And then behind there is just bush country down to the river. So I'm just trying to look to see if my sister is in that photo. I can't remember. I don't think so, no. But so they're all lining up. You can see balls floating in the water there. This is one of the events where they all had to jump in at the blow of the whistle and collect as many balls as possible. And the house that got the most balls won of the tennis ball. And this is at Fort Jameson, and this is one of the inter-school sports. And it's interesting, it says inter-school sports. So I think it was just Fort Jameson and Lilongwe racing each other. But you can see the different, or the standard of the playing field. I think Bishop Mackenzie's playing fields are a bit better now than just mown bush grass, which this is. And then in the background, you've got the obstacle course of having to climb through the hanging tires, and then going underneath the canes. So there were all sorts of non-regular events, as well as running and high jump and so on.
Are you in this photo?
This is me, the guy laughing his head off. That's me there. Obviously having a great time. You see, I enjoyed school.
You're smiling in all of your photos.
Yes. This is Girl Guides. It's my sister and her friend. They were on a camp when they moved up from Brownies to Girl Guides. And they went out with another group. I don't know where the other girls are from, which school they're from, but they're all Girl Guides from around Lilongwe somewhere. And my sister's the shorter of the two white girls on the right-hand side there. And this is my sister in the middle, and this is back in Lilongwe, and this is a skipping race, another event that is not really played much these days. So again, and you can see the flags of the different houses. We all had to line up behind there and cheer from the side. And that is a photo I came across, which was the newly built Guides and Scouts headquarters in Lilongwe. I don't know if that still exists. That'd be interesting to see if it exists, because it's very much in the style of the Lilongwe Town Hall that was built. And if I can just digress into that one thing I mentioned is that at school we used to have the annual school play, where there was one main play which everybody, all different ages participate, but not everybody was part of it. And we had plays, annual plays that was put on at the end of each year, and we would have them act them out originally in the old school hall at the school, but then when the town hall was built, the hall was used for school plays, and then each class would do their own play. So the Lilongwe community participated in Lilongwe School and then Bishop Mackenzie. And I think this building was actually probably built around about the time of the renaming of the school, when it became Bishop Mackenzie. That's me and my sister with our dog Binky, and as I say, grey shirt and shorts with a woven tie with horizontal blue and white bands, and then the tunic of the girls was blue, sort of royal blue with a white collar, and the socks were just, I think, grey socks for boys and white socks for girls. I'm the tallest one at the back towards the right there. And this, as I say, was a group of us at a birthday party. I'm not quite sure whose party it was, but There's one girl. There's a sad thing. Yeah, the behind the boy who's standing in the front with a bow tie, you can just see a blonde-haired girl behind him. And then the boy in the checked shirt is her brother. The sad thing about that is that she and one other boy, Ronald Payne, was a tragedy that happened during the Longwood school times of a drowning. They both drowned at Salima at I think it was Senga Bay Hotel at the time. They got caught. It was quite stormy, and they got caught in a rip current, and then they were taken out into the lake. There were very big waves, and unfortunately both drowned, and that really shook the school. The girl, Biddy Coulter, she was the daughter of one of the teachers, a very, very liked teacher. And then Ronald Payne, his father was working for the PWD, I think. And so that was a dark time. The only time I can remember of a tragedy happening during the Longwood school days. But and then another, I'm just trying to think of any of these that I'm in touch with now. The little girl with her hands to her mouth on the left, standing next to the boy with the checked shirt, we're still in touch with her, Barbara Chalmers. Her father was the head of ADMARC in Lilongwe. But the others I have lost touch with. Well, there's my sister on the right here with the band in her hair.